I'm Danny, and this is the Scream Princess podcast. Hello there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Scream Princess podcast. Today, I have with me Bram Stoker's great grand nephew, Dacre Stoker. How are you doing, Dacre?
I'm well. It's been a long time since we've seen each other in the flesh,
It
but nice to
has.
catch up to you, virtually, Danny. Great to see you.
You too. You look great. I think was it 2015? It was the first ever Sheffield HorrorCon,
Right, that's
and it
right.
was either 2014 or 2015, so it's a long time ago.
Yeah, and we were celebrity guests along with some other interesting people. That's where I also got to meet some of the Hammer
Yeah.
Horror ladies and Tom Scavani and all sorts of other
Who else
interesting.
was there? Ken Foray and Gunnar Hansen.
Yeah, and that was interesting but sad. One
Yes.
of Gunner's last appearances, and we had lots of chats together and found our common interest in
Wasn't he
flying.
such a nice guy?
Yeah, really nice guy.
Like I remember going to the bar, I think was it either the night before or in between? And was it a couple of days, wasn't it, the festival? And going to the bar and having a chat with him. And I think it was the night before, and he had that really calm voice, and he was just such a lovely, lovely guy. And obviously you're meant to be terrified of him because he's Leatherface, but to me he was more like he looked like Santa. So
Yeah,
it was kind of this weird, like, contradiction. But yeah, what a nice guy. Such a shame.
yep. And there was none
He did give me a picture. I've got a signed picture somewhere that he
that would be special. Yeah.
yeah, I'm going to frame it actually. So I've only just moved here and this is my studio and I'm going to frame some bits and pieces and put them up in the studio. So
Well, I better send you some Dracula paraphernalia to send your.
yes. Yeah. I've also got two naughty kittens in here at the moment and I think it might be about Zoomies time, so I may have to get up and remove them. I've got one sat on my bureau right now and another one's inside a drawer. So they're only 8 months old and they're
Oh, that's adorable. That's
yeah.
adorable. You might hear one of my dog barking in the background, and we've got a cat wandering around somewhere, but I don't think I'm interrupting any of their feeding time right now. So
No, mine have been fed. This will be their way of trying to get seconds. So great grand nephew, how does that work? Because apart from like, when it's just straight up nephew, I get very confused. So what's the tree?
lots of great. So here goes. Bram was one of seven children. All right, he was number three in line. So his youngest brother, George, was my great grandfather. So that makes Bram and the other males great grand uncles. But what's interesting in the family, Danny, is that only three of those seven had any offspring that survived. And one of those lines, the Daniel Farson line, who was came out of Bram's younger Bram, brother just next to him, Tom,
Mhm.
they've all died off. So the only lines that are active, Bram does have two great grandsons still alive and a number of offspring from there. And
Mhm.
then George, the youngest, his youngest brother had a son who came to Canada after World War One, and
Right.
that's my grandfather, great grandfather, and there's like nine of us floating around.
Can you hear them? I'm going to remove him. Up you go. Go on. He's trying to kill this line. Go on. Out. There you go. He's off. He found this Camp Crystal Lake sign and he was eating it.
They're obedient. That's pretty incredible. You've got obedient
Well,
kittens.
no, he's gone. He'll come back. Now she's trying to get something. So
Yeah.
you're in Canada then, because I was talking to somebody on a podcast yesterday. I was speaking to a director called Joshua Kennedy, and he knew who you were, but he was asking where you're from, and I was like, I'm sure it's America, and I was trying to say Maine.
No, you're right. I'm originally from Canada, but I moved to South Carolina in the U.S. about
Okay,
33
so
years ago.
nowhere near Maine. I think it actually may have been Gunner that was from Maine. I knew somebody that I spoke to that day.
No, it wasn't me. Although I'd visited Maine, when I was in Eastern Canada, that's where we used to go to the
Right.
ocean, which was colder than all get out. It's sort of like your North Sea.
I
Um,
live in the northeast of England now. I've left London and I'm in the northeast. So
so
I know
where?
about cold.
Oh
Somewhere called
yeah.
South Shields, and I'm right next to the beach. So it's
boy.
Well, it's particularly cold today.
Well, every time I go to Whitby, and I go to Whitby an awful lot because of its
Cool.
Dracula connection, I put about 1 foot in the water, and that's enough for me. But I see people out there swimming, well, and they're surfing with these,
Yeah.
rubber suits on, but that's
Yeah,
too cold.
I've gotten in the sea here in the summer, not in the winter. I've never gotten in the sea in Whitby. I've only been to Whitby twice, and I think the first time was in October, so that was obviously freezing. And the
Yeah.
second time was at the end of the summer, but we didn't go down to the beach. We walked along the pier, and of course we went to the Dracula experience. What do you think of that?
Well, it's fun,
It is
and
fun.
it's made to give people who come to Whitby looking for some Dracula connection. And this is what sort of bothers me a little bit, Danny, is, and I've been trying to do this for 15 years,
Hmm.
find these places connected to the novel Dracula, to Bram's life,
Yeah,
and let's see what's meaningful there that the tourists can come to, other than walking around with your copy of Dracula and
yeah,
re walking the steps of Mina or Lucy and the
yeah,
act, everything else. But there's nothing else there that it's like you walk in. And so
yeah,
here you have a sort of a cinema version of Dracula, which is fun. It gives you a couple scares, but I wish there was something a little more at the museum, which occasionally
yeah.
David Pybus did put up an exhibit, but it was only temporary in 2012. It wasn't
Right.
permanent. And I know people come looking for that.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they've got Christopher Lee's cloak in there, so from one of the Hammer Dracula films.
Yeah.
So I know that's there, and obviously they've got the chair. And it's fun to do a couple of selfies with the stuff, and I do think it's super fun. And I've gone to it both times. I've actually been in Whitby, and of course I've walked up the stairs, and I've been to the Abbey, and I've bought myself a lucky duck. Do you have a lucky duck?
Oh, I collect those ducks from all over the place. So yes.
Do. I've got a lucky duck from Whitby, and I've just been to York, and they have a ghost merchants. And I went to get a ghost. I've been before and I've got a ghost, but there was a queue for the queue, and it you would have been like hours. So I ended up going to there was a similar thing that does cats. It was a cat museum, so I ended up getting a cat instead.
York, I usually, when I run my tours, we
Hmm.
go Manchester because it's easy to fly to and closer to York. And I like
Yeah.
to spend a day in York because they've got some really interesting, these underground kind of history things where you go through and learn all the history, but you're scared and these actors t walk you
Yeah.
through. In about an hour and a half, you learn an awful lot.
Yeah. I think my favorite one there is the Bloody Tour. And that's she's very good. The girl that runs it, I think she's called Mad Alice or something, and she's very theatrical, but she really does have the stories. So that's a really
Yeah,
fun one.
sure.
That is a
Absolutely.
really fun one. And you do, I mean, you do all sorts of other things as well. I mean, you've written two books. So am I right in saying one was based or the inspo was taken from Bram's diaries or his like notes?
Yeah, so this is the short version. So,
Right.
as I started digging into the whole family's life, because I originally started to look for who was George Stoker, and he was actually an interesting doctor who invented ozone therapy. But he
Okay.
lived with Bram in London, him in Florence, while he was doing some of his early medical work. But while I was doing all this digging, I found the more famous member of the family. I found lots of information about where his notes are kept, where the
Mhm.
Dracula typescript is. And then I found a journal of Bram's in the Isle of Wight in one of his great grandson's attic. So, Danny, these three documents, the notes, the typescript that lives in Seattle, the notes live in Philadelphia, and the journal um, have given me tremendous insight into Bram's life, his writing process, the books that he used to do his writing. And I found lots of things that were taken out of Dracula, either from the note stage or from the early typescript stage. So there are lots of things that didn't make it into the final novel that I felt, this is information I'm going to
Yeah.
use to write fictional work. So I can
Amazing.
help people understand what characters Bram was thinking of, what locations, and let's make a prequel to the story. Let's make a sequel. So I've done both of those. They have been actually both international bestsellers. Dracula the Undead with Ian Holt
Right.
is the sequel, and Dracul, the prequel, all involves historical based fiction, but
Right.
using these bits and pieces, quite a few bits and pieces actually, that Bram left behind, and
Mhm.
all the biographical information about Bram's life. because I wanted to get people to understand, but fictionalize it so it's
Yeah.
interesting. What what was Bram going through while he was writing the novel? And as Bram did in Dracula, what potentially led him to write the novel as a warning to the world that it was real? Because,
Right.
he tried to make Dracula appear real
Hmm.
so his readers would be really scared. So, what I did with my co-authors was integrate that sense of reality with proper maps, proper descriptions of places. Sometimes it meant going there or using Google Maps and all that to create a sense of reality in the same way that Bram did.
Right. And did he travel a lot? Like, so where are his inspirations? Because I saw something about Ireland, or was that
Yeah, so he was brought up and raised in Ireland.
up in Ireland?
So he started his life there, and he didn't move to London until he started working for Henry Irving, who had just taken over the Lyceum Theatre.
Right.
So let's look at ground zero for a moment, and a lot of your listeners probably understand that Irish folklore is pretty deep with
Hmm.
cautionary tales of fairies and goblins and banshees and pukas and all these other things that really scare folks and involve taking the life from the dead, or excuse
Right.
me, the dead taking the life from the living and creating this undead world. So that's really what Bram got out of Ireland. Nonetheless, he even got inspiration from Oscar Wilde's mother, who actually
Mhm.
wrote a book all about Irish folklore and directed him to Transylvania because I found that book, the same book that he bought himself and had in his library, that mentioned Transylvanian vampires and superstitions are very similar to that of the Irish.
Mhm.
So Bram, being this detail-oriented guy, brought up around folklore, mysterious folklore and superstition, it was logical for him when he moved to England and was studying at the London Library to incorporate real stories that he found in the libraries there. And that's where he discovered Transylvania
Mhm.
and Emily Gerard, the Scottish lady who actually wrote about vampire superstitions that people thought were real.
And did he ever make it over to Transylvania? No.
No,
But you've
no,
been because you run tours.
I've been there now. I think I'm up to 15 times.
Right.
Uh, and I do run tours there. Bram got such a good sense of the country by brave people back in the
Mhm.
1800s going to Transylvania and writing books about it. And I found all those books sitting in the London Library, and they were listed at the back of his notes. So even though he didn't go there, he had a great sense of the geography, the culture,
Right.
what it looked like. He had all the maps he needed. He was very precise, Danny, in writing Dracula. And he got that sense of precision
Mm.
by the type of guy that he was himself, but
He's very
also
meticulous.
making this, yeah, meticulous to make the story seem real.
So do you think, I mean, when you went to the London Library, um, were they kind of new editions, or do you think you could actually have been looking at the books that he actually did his research in? Are they old books? Because London Library's got
No,
everything.
you're absolutely right. This was somewhat scandalous, if I may say. So 2020, geez, what was it? Um, Around 2020, I got an email from a guy that runs the fundraising at the London Library. He was a big Dracula fan. And hold on once, can you hear the dog barking in the background?
No, I think the cat can though, because look, she's now gone.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go quiet my beast,
Yeah,
with
it
my
is
children
okay.
of the night. Hold on one quick
We
sec.
like pets here. We're all good with pets. I've still got one sitting in a drawer. I pulled my drawers out of well, my drawer out of my bureau, and it's a vintage bureau, and the slidey bit's broken, so I can't get the drawer back in until my friend comes around to help me. It's a boy job, so I need
Well,
to.
I'm back, and the dog probably will keep barking in a moment. But
It's
so,
fine.
um, so here's what happened. So he found the list of books in the back of Bram's notes that live in Philadelphia, but they've been published, and it listed all these books. He knew that Bram was a member of the London Library. So he thought, well, I just wonder if by some chance any of these books are still in circulation. So you may remember, and I'm not sure if they did this in the UK, but library books back in my day when I was a young lad, they would
Hmm.
have a little sleeve in the back and a little stamp you date the return
Yeah.
date. Okay. So they don't do that in private libraries. The
Right.
London Library being private, you'd simply take the books to the clerk at the front and just say, Bram Stoker on the track of the Crescent, or Charles Bonner, Transylvania, then and now. So then they'd write it down, Mr. Stoker, bring the book back in 2 weeks, please.
Mm-hmm.
Bram checked out the books, but he also had a pencil with him while he was doing his research.
Do
And he would
note.
make little check marks in the margins. He
Mm.
would underline certain passages. He would put little NB for nota bene, which is like, look, check this out later. So he was naughty in a way
That is
because he,
very naughty.
yeah,
Defacing library property.
exactly. And luckily Philip Spedding said, oh, don't worry, we're not going to fine anybody for this. But what it's done is it has really confirmed that the
Mm.
London Library was ground zero for all of Bram Stoker's research for Dracula.
And it's
And
also made those books worth so much more than
well,
they
yes,
would have been.
I don't think for some reason that they're going to sell them
No.
immediately. What's funny is they took the books out of public circulation and put them in a special private area
Yeah, of course.
until they figured out what to do. Now, mind you, what I did, because I was thinking the same way you are, and if any of your listeners are ahead of me, this is what I did. I went right back to my hotel after a very fruitful day in the library, jotting down all the names of these books, and I was allowed to take photographs
Mhm.
of the pencil marks in the book. And in particular, they wanted me to help verify, do I know any of Bram's personal books that
Right.
the family still owns
Uh-huh.
that has any of these types of markings?
Okay.
Because there's no guarantee that Bram Stoker put a check mark next to
Mhm.
volcanoes are the home to subterranean gods, or vampires do this, or trance walk. It might be circumstantial, but we found two books that Bram's son gave to the library
Right.
after Bram died. It was a donation, and they had similar marks in the margin.
Mm.
And I had in my possession, on loan from my cousins, the great grandsons, a
Hmm.
copy of Dracula that Bram's editor gave him in 1900. So the book came out in 1897. In 1900, they wanted to make an abridged edition. So they gave Bram back a hardcover first edition and said, would you take your pencil and mark out 30,000 words?
Right.
So Bram had to go through and decide, well, which 30,000 words aren't all that meaningful and won't destroy the story, so that they could then republish it as a shorter book in paperback.
Right.
So by having that book, I could see Bram's handiwork with pencil and what markings he would use to take words out. And
Hmm.
sometimes, like if you take a section out, you might have to write a few words back in to bridge them back
Yeah.
together. And that's exactly what the same style of things he did in London Library. So, that was our ability to really quantify and qualify that this really were the books. So back to what I did, I zipped out to my hotel room and went on to the website of Abe Books, ABE.
Uh-huh.
This is where people sell secondhand books, old historical books, yard sales, estate sales. And I quickly gobbled up exactly the same edition of
Right.
each of these books. And I ended up getting like 13 of them, not all
Uh-huh.
26. The 13 important ones that really had references to maps, to the clothings of the gypsies, the descriptions, anything with vampire. And really, I hit it just right because
Hmm.
I got them for relatively inexpensive because nobody knew that they were significant at the time.
Yeah.
Now I go back and look, just as I'm sure you're thinking, they're
Yeah.
even
Like, where can I get one of these?
yeah. And I think if one day, if the London Library ever goes into real financial trouble, they could auction those things off
Oh
with
my gosh,
Bram's
yeah.
writing in it for a
Well, I've
lot.
noticed the book behind you, the yellow edition, that looks very similar to me as the one they've got in Whitby Abbey in the little museum.
Yes. So they have an actual first edition. This
Right.
is this is a reproduction first edition.
Okay. So I do,
But
I took a picture of it last time I was there.
yeah, I have the family's first edition, Danny, that Bram signed and dedicated to his mother.
That's incredible.
That lives in a vault. And
Yeah.
I bring it out occasionally. I loan it to museums if they're
Uh-huh.
doing an exhibit. But this is one I walk around with when I go to different
Yeah.
locations for photo ops and to read
Uh-huh.
uh, passages from. Like, have you ever been to Robin Hood's Bay when you were in the Whitby area?
No, we didn't go there. I've been to just the kind of the center and the steps and around the shops. I've never been to Robin Hood's Bay.
Well,
I've
put
been
that
to
on
the
your
pier.
list.
Robin Hood's Bay is a little bit further, isn't it? And I really do fancy doing a bit of a hike, like just doing the kind of coastal hike. So maybe
Yeah.
next summer.
Well, that's the thing to do. And that's what Bram and Florence and young Noel did in
Mm.
1890. They walked, and many people did, that trail, the coastal trail
Yeah.
from Whitby to Robin Hood's Bay. It is about almost 5 miles.
Yeah, I've
So
got this idea that I actually want to do the whole of the England coast path. So it's a national trail and you can actually get right round it. Obviously, it would take like my whole life, but I've done a few sections. So that's just another section. And
that,
then one
that would
day
be a
they'll
good
all
one.
join up.
And when you do that, look for the Bay Hotel, which
Right.
is the same exact hotel mentioned in this book where Lucy and Mina and Mrs. Westerner go for their severe tea,
And it's
as
still
did
a hotel to this day.
exactly the same hotel,
Okay.
the bay with the big bay window looking out over the bay. So
Right.
yeah, that's what's so wonderful about your country more than ours is you're obviously a lot older, but the preservation is really important to your culture, and
Yeah.
things don't change that much in these old areas. Yes, in the new areas they do, certainly
Mm.
as ours do, but it's really nice to step back a couple hundred years and be able to walk into this town
Yeah.
and say, hey, this church was here 300 years ago or
Yeah.
400 years ago, or this abbey was here. And it's the same thing that Bram Stoker would have touched or seen or looked at or
Yeah.
used in the story. There's something special about
I
that.
always really wish I could like, I don't know, like, touch the stone or something and then suddenly transport back in time. Not necessarily be amongst them, but just so I could kind of see people moving about their day and, doing what they do and seeing the clothes they wore and how they spoke. Because I'm sure their accents would have been very different. The words they used would have been very
Yeah.
different to what we do now. So yeah, time travel. I'd love to time travel. If anyone knows how to make that happen.
Well, you just need to get a cast, get a spot in Outlander, and
Yeah.
Claire can tell you how to do it with those magic
With those
rocks.
stones in Scotland, yeah, no, I'm a big fan of Outlander. And
Oh,
then
me too.
I started watching it, and I think before I'd even been to Scotland, and then the first time I went to Scotland was actually on a trip, and we went to Whitby on the way, then to Scotland, to Edinburgh, and then on the way back we went to York. So we did kind of round trip, and that's when I was still in London. But I did actually end up living in Scotland for a little bit. The end of 2023, beginning of 2024, I was living in Scotland.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Well,
yeah,
Bram actually
all
wrote
adventure.
he wrote Dracula while he was in Scotland, north of
Mm.
Aberdeen, in
Oh,
in Cruden Bay, very close to Peterhead. So
okay.
after he went to Whitby, he did kind of like you did. He went on up to Scotland looking for a very remote place
Mm,
with his wife and son to get away from it all.
yeah,
And that little fishing village of Cruden Bay, then known as Port Errol, now Cruden Bay because the big crude oil pipeline from the North
right.
Sea inland there. And many people think, oh, it's Whitby, it's Whitby. Yeah, he was inspired in Whitby. He wrote
Mm,
notes at Whitby, but he was only there once. But he was
mm,
in Cruden Bay 11 summers, and
wow.
they
11 summers.
11 summers. They've got a castle of their own called Slains Castle.
Right.
That the interior layout of Dracula is taken from that castle.
And can you still go to the castle?
Yeah, it's here.
Mm,
Here's what's funny about it. It's owned by this wonderful young couple who happen to own this farmland.
right.
The castle is right on the edge of this pasture
Hmm.
where they cut the hay, right on the edge of the cliff, very dangerous cliff down to
Hmm.
the ocean. But because they don't want to or have no support from the government to fence it off or to fix it to the point where they can charge admission
Hmm.
and therefore be potentially liable for anybody getting hurt, they just leave it open. Enter at your own risk.
Yeah, there you go. Fair enough.
You could it's a about a 10-minute walk from downtown Cruden Bay, nice little path, and you can go into Slains and you can actually walk in. it's really bizarre, Danny. Your copy of Dracula will, in chapter two, you can walk in and read the exact doors that
Really?
Bram had Harker walk through. I'm sure it's the same way Bram walked through this
Hmm.
door, this hall, into another door, and entered into an octagonal room with no windows to the outside, and then into another room, put down my luggage. That was my bedroom. That's exactly the way it's laid out. And I'm sure it's the way Bram did it himself when he was
Yeah.
the visitor to the Earl of
That
Errol.
gives me tingles just thinking about like just him being there and that you could just walk in there. And now I'm like, I must go there because I actually love Scotland. Like, and I've been to a few places in Scotland now, and it's such a beautiful place. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking there's a road trip you can do where you go right the way around. So I'm like, could I do a tour and kind of get there one day?
Well, it suits
Definitely.
nicely. Here's something that I normally will do when we do a tour and it's we have enough time to do it. We'll go Whitby, and then we'll stop along the way, but we will do Edinburgh
Yeah,
and the Writers' Museum in Edinburgh is so beautiful. And then we'll continue on up to Whitby, but we will stop to add in some non-Dracula things like whiskey tasting at some of the whiskey
yeah,
um, distilleries, and look at some of this. We'll look at Stirling on the way. We'll look at some of the other beautiful castles, with the
yeah,
destination being Cruden Bay. And the one hotel in town, the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel, is exactly the same hotel, obviously updated
yeah.
quite nicely since Bram was there, but they've actually got his signature in the guest book still there.
Amazing.
Oh
And
yeah.
nobody's stolen it. So
Nope.
is it
So
under glass?
they've actually made a reproduction of it so they can
Ah,
show the general public reproduction, but
yeah.
special people, you can actually look
Special people.
under.
I'm going to
Yeah.
ask. I'm going to say, I'm friends with Dacre.
Yeah.
Can I see the real thing, please?
They will. Yeah. They're nice. Yeah.
That's really exciting.
Oh, he
Well, I
wrote
think we're
while
just
he
coming to
was
the end of
there.
our first half. So I'm
Okay.
going to have a short break and I'm going to
Yep.
lock the cats away and then I'll send you another link.
I mean, the next link. Okay.
Speak to you soon.
See you in a bit.
Welcome back to the Screen Princess podcast.
All righty.
So where were we? I feel like we've both zoomed in. I went into the kitchen. The kittens had stolen my dish sponge, but I have to put it in a jail. So it lives in a Tupperware so that they can't get to it, but they've managed to open it and they chew bits off and spit them out. So I've given them food and I'm hoping that keeps them quiet for the next half an hour.
Bribery. Yeah. Usually
Bribery.
works.
They act
Yeah.
like they act like I don't feed them, honestly. They're terrible. So so I was going to ask about the original manuscript of Dracula.
Yeah.
Something like 200 pages missing.
So yeah, here's one of the cool things about this about the whole sort of story of Dracula being written,
Hmm.
and what we do know now, now that more research has been done. So when I started doing my research for Dracul, the prequel, J.D. Barker and I managed to talk our way to get to Paul Allen, that's the co-founder of Microsoft, who's in Seattle, Washington, to talk our way into, doing serious research, which we were, even though it was fictional work, so we could analyze the typescript. We had heard that it starts on page 102. We just didn't know, number one, if that was true and what else is taken out.
Hmm.
So long story short, we get to Seattle, we go in, we've got a few hours. We can't take our phones. We have to have pencil only and paper pad. And immediately what we start doing is, go to the first page of there was like four boxes of this manuscript. And what it was actually technically a typescript since it's typed, not
Hmm.
written. So I realized quickly that there were stamp marks on it. I later found out those stamp marks were a typing service. So Bram wrote the whole thing,
Hmm.
had somebody type it, and at that point, him and his editor at Archibald Constable Publishers in London and his brother Bram started making edits. We don't know what the edits were from the publisher. We know Bram's handwriting, we know his brother's handwriting, but
Hmm.
what we know is a lot of things were crossed out and there's 101 pages missing. But that didn't stop me. What I realized was I knew the novel like the back of my hand. I quickly went through, and JD was helping me going through the rest of the 400 pages that was there and looking for anything else that was crossed out. And as we found it, we started copying it down on our note paper. That's all we had time to do. We couldn't do comparison there. We just wrote everything we could find. So then we went back to our hotel and started with an online Gutenberg version of Dracula. And I started comparing. Ah, that really was taken out, this passage we found here. And what we found was there was lots of references to things throughout the novel that had been worked on in the notes.
Hmm.
So he had actually proposed, but we didn't see it because it's missing, a series of about 20 letters that
Right.
were referenced in the typescript that were taken out, like
Hmm.
letter from Dacre to Danny or Danny to Dacre asking you to be on the podcast. Well, if I wasn't going to be on the podcast, you've got to go through the manuscript and take out any reference to Dacre and Danny on the podcast.
Right.
So what we thought was taken out, we confirmed the short story Dracula's Guest. And I knew that story very well. There was four references to it
Right.
crossed in the typescript. And then we quickly found a horrifying reference to the Munich dead house that Jonathan Harker goes in,
Okay.
crossed out. So then we looked in the notes, and there was a reference to four different references to this Jonathan Harker character going
Hmm.
into and seeing Count Dracula lying on a bier in the Munich dead house,
Right.
as they did, Annie, back in the day, and they used to lay people out for 3 days to make sure they're really dead.
Yeah.
And they had wires to bells, so in case
Uh-huh.
they were. So that was what I came to the conclusion of, and I've actually written it in this book. This version of Dracula right here has all those bits put back in.
Right. So that's that book there. That's the original story, but with all the original bits that.
Yeah.
Okay. So is that one? That's not one of your two books, though. That's something else.
No, that's now we've gone beyond two. There's two
Okay.
fictional
Gone
books,
beyond
but
two now.
the third, and I've got a couple of nonfiction, like this other one down here with Bram and me on the cover. Those are all the research and things that I found, interesting
Right.
letters, documents that I think people would like.
Yeah.
So I was able to confirm with two other scholars, Elizabeth Miller and Robert Basang, that the original Dracula had a series of letters that was
Right.
all about the Count asking for legal help from the Peter Hawkins law firm,
Uh-huh.
Jonathan Harker, to come over here to consummate all the legal transactions of buying the property in London.
Hmm.
So it was a bit dry, but it's my great granduncle Bram Stoker setting the stage for why
Yeah.
the hell is Jonathan Harker going there. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
not many movies even include that information. It's, oh, Harker's off on a trip.
Well, do you know,
And,
I've just watched the original Nosferatu, but I
oh,
had never seen it before. I was sent a copy a long time ago, and I don't think I ever ended up watching it. And I've just watched it, and I was like, but why has he gone there? That was my question in that. When I was watching it with somebody, and they were like, "Well, I don't know if it actually explains." I was like, I mean, it's a tough watch, I think, because it's kind of a silent film, and
it's silent, it's old, it's slow.
it's very old,
And Danny,
and
they got an armadillo in the castle in Transylvania, which is an interesting touch.
yeah,
But
and a hyena.
and hyena
A
too.
hyena that was supposed to be a wolf because I was like, wait, that doesn't make sense. But I mean, I can see that in its day, it would have been very shocking because people didn't have horror. So, a vampire, an undead being would have been
Yeah.
horrific. But Nosferatu was a bit naughty, wasn't it? Because it was basically based on Bram's book, and then
It was
there was a lawsuit.
unauthorized. It was an unauthorized adaptation, and
Yeah.
Florence Stoker, with the help of the Incorporated Society of Lawyers, sued Prana Films. They
Hmm.
won the court case in 2.5 years. Prana Films was bankrupt when the judge went to settle for restitution, and they said, "We have no money." Okay, then destroy the film. Well, thank God the film wasn't destroyed because it is a wonderful form of German expressionism,
Yeah.
and it is the first sort of horror film. There are a couple ones before that, but
Mm.
this really is it. Um, and then since then, and we should spend some time before we run out, Danny, talking about the latest version
Yeah.
because
I was going to get there.
because it's public domain now, that film has been remade a number of times.
Yeah.
And the latest version I just saw I've seen it twice since it came out, and I know it's just come out in England. It's
Mm.
wonderful. It's interesting to me because Robert Eager's the director, and I've seen him interviewed. He wanted not only to capture the essence of the original film, but just as you just said, I want to capture the essence of the original film that it was based on, the
Yeah.
original book, excuse me, it's based on. So he has got homages to Bram Stoker's Dracula in Nosferatu, and it's driving some of the fans batshit crazy
Yeah,
because
I've heard very mixed reviews so far. Some people have not loved it, and others have like raved about it. So I haven't been to see it, and I've actually got not a lot to do for the rest of the week, so I might take myself to watch it.
I wouldn't. Are you, listen, you're the scream queen. Do you really scream in horror movies?
Um, I'm very easy to make jump. I don't necessarily scream, but I will jump. Like if I'm sitting on the sofa, and it doesn't even have to be a horror movie, it can just be any movie that has a kind of jump moment. I will jump out
Yeah.
of my skin. I'm very easy to make jump.
Are you squeamish with like gross, disgusting looking vampires that body looks like it's like a revenant
Um,
from the grave? Is that okay? You okay with that?
I'm okay with that. Yeah, I'm okay with
Then
that.
I was going to
I'm
say either go with a friend or bring one of the cats because it is dark, it is
okay.
gothic. If you like, and what I remember from you is you like this dark stuff. I do, and I just
Mhm.
find too many of these horror movies are cleansed to the point where, oh, we can't offend anybody, and we'll put a shitload of CGI in here.
Yeah.
This one is an old-fashioned text and acting driven film with really great atmosphere. And I will say this little spoiler, the Dracula has a mustache. Now, Count Orlok did not, but it's
Uh-huh.
driving people crazy. Oh, it's not like Nosferatu, he didn't have one. Yes, but Bram Stoker's Dracula did,
And the
and
hairy
that's
hands, right? Hairy.
Harry
Yeah.
Man's. This is the homage, and a thank you, Robert Eagers, for doing this to remember where the inspiration originally came from for the original version of the movie,
Mm.
and he's just keeping it alive. And let me tell you, this actress, Johnny Depp's daughter, she is like um, the girl in, oh geez, come on, the one who's Linda Blair's head goes flying around
Oh
in that
yeah, Exorcist.
Exorcist. Her bodily contortions when she is possessed is otherworldly and it's very
Oh.
athletic. It's incredible.
Mm.
And look, William Dafoe to be in it, it's wonderful. So I highly recommend it and take it for what it is. Just
Okay.
like the last voyage of the Demeter that I do want to give 5 stars to.
I
They are
haven't
like,
seen that either.
oh, you got to see it. It's another old school film that is driven by the narrative. And look, in chapter 7 of Dracula, there's hardly any of the ship's log, Danny.
Mm.
But the writers have figured it out how to pay homage to the story and keep anything that was in the ship's log from the novel incorporated in the story. And look, if you know Dracula, you know the ending of the story, but the movie is still good because the way they go about to get to the ending is
Yeah.
pretty ingenious, and it gives you a claustrophobic feel being in that ship for so long with a
Yeah.
bloody vampire going around.
Yeah. I feel like after this tonight, I might actually have to go and watch the Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Gary Oldman version.
Oh, well,
And
that
then
would be good. That gets you
I'm in
far.
the mood. I'm in the mood. It was Nosferatu, the original last week, and then it could be this, and then maybe not tomorrow, maybe the following day. I might actually go and go.
That's a full week. Now let me
Yeah.
ask you about this. You've seen the 92 Gary Oldman film before?
Yes.
Okay, before I give you any spoiler, my insight, what did you take away from that film? What did you like about it?
Oh, God, I don't know. I just it was so atmospheric. And I don't know, everyone, I mean, he was great as Dracula, slightly like campy, but I mean, he looked great. And is that how in the book you'd imagine him? Does he look like, when you read it, does he look like,
Only a part of it. I mean, listen,
right?
I think it's 12, if I'm correct, 12 different changes of costume for Gary Oldman in that film,
Mm-hmm.
and parts of it. But people don't get it. In Dracula, he never looked like Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee. He was never
Mm.
that debonair aristocrat. He was more like the Count in Nosferatu by Robert Eggers right now.
Yeah.
But I will say this, and again, I think it's ingenious. I like the 92 film. Jim Hart has become a good friend. He's the screenwriter.
Hmm.
I actually stayed in Francis Ford Coppola's house 3 weeks ago in New Orleans, although I haven't met him, but I was a guest at his home. And what they did was they elevated the role of the vampire film
Hmm.
in cinema and in our society by creating the romantic link between Vlad the Impaler and his missing reincarnated wife that has
Hmm.
nothing to do with the novel Dracula. But by turning it into this search for eternal love and to find my long lost reincarnated wife was a brilliant move
Hmm.
because it took the movie away from just being a horror movie and it made it a year-round movie, also
Yeah.
a movie to be seen on Valentine's Day
A
because it's
gothic
about
love story.
love is forever. Not Bram's Dracula, but still one hell of a good story.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, all the characters look great in that. And I think it's, everybody who loves horror will have seen that movie.
Yeah, and atmospheric, good scenery. And Anthony Hopkins, my God, he was a wonderful, crazy lunatic
Hmm.
type Van Helsing. And
Well, do you follow him on like is it Instagram or TikTok or whatever? Because he is bonkers. He's
really,
very, very entertaining, but he's an incredible pianist. I think he's actually a composer. But he'll just have videos of him just going off the wall. But I mean, he's having fun and it's entertaining. But yeah, he'll dance and he'll just be crazy. So I feel like that's kind of part of him in that.
letting his hair down and being his
Yeah, you
real
should
self.
definitely check him out on Instagram.
Yeah, I no, I will. So look, before we got some time left.
Yeah.
I mean, you're an actress, so you look at films a different way, right? So from your perspective as an actor,
Uh,
what gets you going? What do you like about these horror films and many films that you've liked, especially in the Dracula realm or vampire realm, that you can let let me and some of your listeners know about?
well, do you know, I don't know if I do watch them in a different way because I was a fan of horror long before I became an actress. I've been a fan of horror since I was a little girl. But do you know the vampire that I am most scared of? Because when I was a little girl, I had a nightmare about the Count from Sesame Street.
Oh no,
And I
really?
still don't like him to this day. I can deal with other vampires, but my mum used to take me to an old people's home and like she used to make them teas and coffee and I used to just chat to them and they used to give me chocolates. And I had this nightmare that I was in there and the vampire, the count was in there and he was chasing me around trying to like suck my blood and I was like hiding in cupboards. So that's been, yeah,
Wow.
that's probably my first nightmare I ever remember having. And he terrifies me. But as far as other vampires, I mean, I love Blade. And I didn't even realize Blade was a Marvel character when I saw it, but I'm a big fan of Blade. I love the Lost Boys, Near
Oh yeah,
Dark.
yeah,
Obviously the old Hammer films I just think are gorgeous. They're very atmospheric. So Christopher
yeah.
Lee for me is probably my one of my favorite Draculas. But like
I
you said,
often
not
often
necessarily
these
the
panels going where
yeah.
people at these different conventions, oh, let's talk about just as we're doing now, the different people who've played Dracula.
Mhm.
And it normally boils down to Bela Lugosi
Yeah.
and Christopher Lee as sort of the top of the pile, Gary Oldman. But let me ask you this, now that some of the new guys have entered into the fray,
Yeah.
Clay's Bang. Did you see the NBC Netflix co-production with Clay's Bang? It was written by Matt Moffat and Gaddis a couple of years ago.
No, what was it called?
It was just called Dracula, and it was a BBC Netflix.
Yes, I did see it. I did see it, and I thought some of it was okay,
The,
and
the,
then
the
some
third
of it
episode,
wasn't.
the modernization, the third one was a little bit weird, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It kind of lost me there, to be honest. But yeah, to begin with, the beginning of it, I liked.
yeah. Well, and then the other one that's fairly new, I think it's 2014. It's not so new now, but Luke Evans in Dracula Untold, which
I
is
don't
the
think I've seen
story
that
of
one.
how Vlad Dracula became a vampire, which is a film just about, something that's mentioned for about two sentences in
Yeah.
Dracula. But he was quite good, Luke Evans.
Mm.
Um, and I think also Jonathan Rhys Meyers in a short-lived one season NBC streaming show when it was sort of Victorian era, and he was an American businessman as a Dracula. Did you ever hear or see about that one?
No. No, but growing up, I was a big Buffy and Angel fan.
Yeah.
So I think I must have been like a similar age to like when they were at school in the TV show. So, or maybe they were a little bit older than me, but yeah, I was a massive Buffy fan. So obviously, I mean, that's full of loads of weird and wonderful demons, but Angel, of course, was a very good vampire. And Spike, Angel and
Yeah.
Spike, I loved both of those characters.
There's a big following. I normally find that at conventions all over the world that, Buffy, people love Buffy
Yeah.
and all the spin-offs. Um, and then did you get over in England, did you get True Blood and Vampire Diaries? Did you get those?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen, I think I've nearly finished watching True Blood. I watched it for a while and then I got lost. I'm pretty sure I watched all of Vampire Diaries. And then it's got the originals, which I think is a spin-off of that. And I
Yeah.
think we had another one possibly that was a spin-off. But yeah, I mean, any vampire stuff, it's always good. It's always watchable.
So I was actually approached by the people who were producing
Mhm.
Vampire Diaries because it's filmed only about 2.5 hours from me outside of Atlanta,
Right.
Georgia. And they were very interested when they don't do these much anymore now. So I'm dating myself. It was probably
Mhm.
5, 6 years ago. When they do a whole season and they do the DVDs and they have an extra DVD with outtakes and interviews.
Yes.
So they wanted me to come to Atlanta to be interviewed on the set, meet the cast, and talk about the premise for making this film.
Right.
So, what was the origin of the vampires in Vampire Diaries, and how is that considered similar to Bram Stoker and his origin of his vampires? And could I draw parallels to any other vampires in cinematic or television history
Mm.
with their origins? Because, Danny, as we know, all myths begin with some degree of truth,
Mhm.
right? And the Vampire Diaries story is the sort of idea of Scandinavian werewolves and vampires coexisting somewhat peacefully and giving each other their turf,
Yeah.
except for some young teenagers from the werewolf clan
Mhm.
just couldn't hold themselves back and during a full moon went over to the vampire clan and got in trouble and got bit. And one of them was going to die. And the only way he could be saved was if this magic lady could transform the bit victim kid into a full-time vampire.
Yeah.
And the village couldn't accept that guy, so they chained him up with his brother, put him in a ship, and pushed him off to sea. Be away with him. And of course, he's adrift for 500 years and shows up in America, and that's how the show starts. So that's the premise of how these vampires came to America. And I got to meet Joe Morgan and some of the other actors, and I was thrilled because it was cool for me. And Joe, I'll never forget, he said, "Yes, when I was in England, we learned Dracula in high school. That was one of the things, and so cool." So
I
he was
didn't
having
learn Dracula in high school. My school didn't do that. That would have been more fun.
Sure. Look, that's one of the classics. It's usually either Dracula or Frankenstein.
I didn't
In
get that either. We had Of Mice and Men, which is a great story, but it's not Dracula or Frankenstein, is it?
well, I think it's sometimes important for English departments to still take a look at the Victorian era and Gothic literature.
There's
Um,
actually a course you can do. It's one of the universities, and I think it's a master's degree or something, and it is in vampire like law in
oh, cool.
literature. And
Nice.
yeah, I mean, I'd love to do it if I could afford to not work and go to university full time, but that would be so much fun. I think
There
the
you-
only vampires I can't get on board with are Twilight because real vampires just don't sparkle.
I know. And look, they get a bad rap. I have to say, they're not my vampires either.
I think
But
they're good for like the teens,
yeah.
they were good for the era of the teens. Maybe I was a bit old for them when they came out when I
Oh,
was
I
a
got to tell you something funny. I was doing my first book tour in Europe, in Italy, actually, Italy and Spain, when I first wrote this stuff back in 2009, and that's the time that True Blood was coming out. That's the time when Stephanie Meyer's first books were coming out, and I was very proud of myself, flying back on business, class back to America, and the lady I'm sitting next to, oh, like in her 70s. What do you do? Oh, I'm an author. I was over here on a book tour. Oh, what do you write? Oh, vampires. Oh, I just love all of the Stephanie Meyer books. I love the Twilight series. And she proceeded to talk to me about it for the next hour or so before I had to faint going to sleep and putting the eye things on in my ear.
I've actually cut with my lipstick. I didn't even realize I'd done this, and I noticed at half time. Look, Vampire's Kiss. I don't know if you can see that if it's
Oh,
blurry.
good for you.
Vampire's Kiss. I think this is only a cheap one that I got from B&M or something, but I was like, had to buy it because of the name.
Well, I'm drinking from my
Drinking Vampire's
vampire
Kiss.
blood little tumbler here with my coffee in
Amazing.
here,
That's
Danny.
such a fun office. All of the books, all of the Dracula. I did think
Yeah.
I should probably have something behind here, but I use this for like I've got a photo studio in that corner, and then I've got my bureau there, and then this is where I'm kind of just doing my podcast and my reviews and things. So I haven't decorated the walls yet, but I feel like it needs some horror.
Well,
Definitely.
yeah, if you're going to do, I mean, you could just get I mean, I think, can't you get on Zoom these like backdrops that are
You
not
can. Oh,
in the
like
real house?
digital ones?
Yeah, the digital
You
backdrop.
can, but sometimes when you move, like a bit of your head will disappear or an arm, like it's
Yeah.
not perfect yet. I mean, I've got a green
Well,
screen at the other end of the studio, so I could switch myself around and do it there and have
all
something
right.
like that. But
So
no,
I got to drop one more thing in because since are you anywhere near Derby?
not really. But I have been to Derby. I've shot a film or two films in Derby. So
Ah.
yeah, I mean, it's about 3 hours away from me.
Well, I was there this past May, and I may be coming back because
Oh,
they were doing a wonderful whole year-long effort on Dracula Comes to Derby, because Derby was the first place in the
oh,
world where Dracula appeared on stage. And
okay,
so I came and gave one of my lectures, and they've asked me to come back
right.
to possibly, they're trying to get the funding together to put an exhibit there that will last longer than the year. And I
Mhm.
have all these old paraphernalia, things of Bram's, so copies of the notes to put in one of their museums there. So it's very possible that I'm back this May, and I
Okay.
am
Well,
also
let me
going.
know if you're
I
there.
will.
I'll come along.
Well, maybe here's the other thing I'm doing. May 27th, I'll be in Whitby along with a group of university students
Right.
doing a little tour. We're going to do 3 days in Whitby, go to Robin Hood's Bay, and then we fly over to Transylvania. So maybe it's a good time for you to show up on Whitby again, and I'll show you some of the other sites there.
Nice. No, I love that. Definitely. I'm only an hour from Whitby.
Well, I think that's probably easier than Derby.
That's probably
Um,
easier than Derby.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. No, I'd love to do that. So you're taking them to Transylvania and you're going to do one of your tours.
So it's actually the first time I've done a two-continent tour. We're going to do UK and or just Whitby in 3 days, train back to Manchester, fly to Transylvania, and do a 5 day tour there. And then I
Amazing.
stay there, and we do another tour with other people, because then I've got to go to Glasgow on the 15th of June
Mhm.
because a wonderful friend of mine, Ellie Zegan, is a actress who is we're doing a talk at a book festival about Emily Gerard, the Scottish lady who delivered to Bram all the folklore
Right.
about superstitions of vampires.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have an action-packed sort of 2.5 weeks in Whitby, in Transylvania, and then back to Scotland.
So if there's any ticket links or anything for any of that for people to go to, you can either shout them out now or you can send me the links and I can put them at the end, or will they
Yeah,
just
I better send them to you because
send them
they're
to me?
not on top of my head. I'll send them to
Okay.
you.
Send them
Yeah,
over when we finish because I'll probably edit tonight and then I'll put them at the end. So then obviously people know how to
absolutely. Well,
get
this has
everything.
been wonderful catching up with you again. And look, I wish you good luck. You're very easy to talk to, and hopefully your podcast become a huge hit. Good for you.
Thank you. I feel like we could have continued this for ages because there's probably so much more that you've got to say. It's been super fascinating. So I'm sure everyone's going to
Look,
love
we
it.
one thing I've learned is keep them guessing. We can always do part B another time.
That's very true. That's very true.
Yeah.
Thank
Let
you for
people come
coming on
back
the
if
show.
they want more, then we've done a good job. And thank you very much for hosting me. Take care now.
Bye bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.